Hello everyone and welcome. My name is Dan Sampaio and I'm delighted to open today's Mondac webinar in association with Panda Law, discussing doing business with Web3. We're joined by a wonderful panel to take us through today's discussion. Dhrupad Das is a partner and a litigator practicing for over 12 years. His technology practice is focused on structuring digital asset and blockchain businesses, integration of transition technologies with traditional legal and business models. Dhrupad also regularly advises and represents publicly listed companies, public sector enterprises, regulatory bodies, and entities in the blockchain and digital asset industry. Pranay Agrawala is a partner and a technology lawyer practicing corporate and commercial law since 2009. He specializes in understanding technologies and bridging the gap between law and tech. He represents clients in the infrastructure, recycling, software and ITES, cryptocurrency, blockchain and allied industries, advising on commercial contracts and M&A transactions, as well as appearing before judicial authorities. Pranay regularly advises multinational companies and startups. And completing today's panel is Nishal Anand. Nishal is a partner and an intellectual property and technology law attorney practicing in New Delhi since 2009. Besides representing large corporations in contentious IP and data protection matters, he regularly advises tech companies and startups on legal and regulatory compliances, including IP structuring, product structuring, and data compliance. Now, before I hand you over to the panel, a housekeeping item. You're able to submit questions to today's panel by typing them into the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. You're able to submit questions at any time, and we will endeavour to answer as many as possible during our Q&A at the end of today's presentations. Any questions that aren't answered will be forwarded onto the panel, who will be in touch. It's now my pleasure to hand you over to Dhrupad, Pranay and Nishal to begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was an excellent introduction, most kind. But a big thanks to everybody else who is here today. You've made time on a busy weekday, sorry. So thank you very much. Today we are going to be talking about doing business with Web3. Web3, I'm going to dive right in. Web3 is a very loaded word. You've been hearing it everywhere, I presume. It's on the media, it's on people's lips, it's in the news, it's in newspapers, drawing room conversations, friends. There's a lot of hype around this word. And this is not the first time it's happened. The entire blockchain industry has gone through many phases of evolution where different technologies or different terms have become very hyped. For example, Web3 was preceded by blockchain, DLT, cryptocurrencies, crypto assets. In the middle, you had, now you have virtual digital assets. You've probably also been hearing terms like metaverse, NFT, minting, mining, staking, ERC20 tokens. It's a zoo. It's a legitimate big zoo of terms, and usually it's enough to make anybody's head spin. It made my head spin in the beginning, to be honest. But I was fortunate. I kind of understood this. I entered this industry about 4 to 5 years back, at which time things were a lot simpler, even though the hype was the same. So today I'm going to cheat a little bit and sidestep these pesky terms and talk about something that's a lot more higher level, a lot more broad picture, something from a macro lens, so to speak, and that's history. I'm going to talk about how Web3 began and how the origins of Web3 can be traced to our Paleolithic ancestors in the Stone Age, almost 75,000 years ago. There is a straight line that runs from that to this, that era to this era. Aaron, can I please have this first slide? So the Stone Age. Most of human history has been spent during the Stone Age. The majority of human population lived in Northern Africa, in the plains of Northern Africa around the Rift Valley. And if you took a time machine and went there, you would find that there were tribes of hunter-gatherers roaming these plains, living a fairly harsh life. There was acute food shortage. I mean, there was food available, but it was not consistent and it was not predictable when such food items would be available, especially meat and nuts and berries, I guess, were more predictable. Meat definitely less so. So it became a matter of survival for tribes to be able to transact and cooperate with each other. So that if I have some game meat in summer, and I have excess of it, I can give it to a tribe I'm friendly with, who will in return give me game meat in winter when I'm starving. So in a very real sense, there was trade. The common theory is that there was barter, which is true, but barter requires you to have there's a quid pro quo to a barter transaction where I give meat, I get meat. But when you are starving and you have nothing, there is very little for you to do, and thus barter does not work. So in this scenario, what landed up happening was that some wise Paleolithic individual came up with the concept of a token. He says, look at these amazing stones. These are flint stones. We use it to make spears. We use it to make weapons. We can kill people and defend ourselves and kill animals with this. It's also used for making cloth, cutting berries. It's very useful. Why don't you keep this as a token of an IOU, so that when I come back to you next season, I will take this back and give you meat instead. It was a very simple transaction which we understand today. And the genesis of this is really 75,000 years ago, this transaction. And when this transaction took place, Flintstones soon gave way to other forms of tokens. There were ostrich eggs that people used. They were finished up, little holes were made in it, and ostrich egg shells, and they were made into jewelry and necklaces. Secondly, there were beads of some sort, there were bones, and there would be other stones and other material that were hardy that were used as token money during this period of time. And during this period, the other thing that's important was that language had not really been invented. Written language had not really been invented yet. So when people had to keep track of certain things or count, they would use sticks, long bones of animals, and make etchings on them, which is today called tally sticks. And that was the most primitive way of accounting that we know today. And as you'll see, that these three things, technological ages, different forms of money, and methods of accounting, all are trends that continue right up till today. And this is really where Web3 comes from. It's a little surprising, some may find, but it is true. Now, once Stone Age man and the Stone Age society remained the way it was for a very, very long time, 95,000 to a lakh years. It's 100,000 years, 100,000 millennia, sorry. It's a long period of time for them to be the way they are. And it is only about 10 to 11,000 years ago when the larger climate on Earth's changed, where the geological epoch of Earth becomes the Holocene, that stability in the climatic system is achieved. And with the advent of this stability, with the climate of Earth settling down and allowing predictable seasons to occur, humans discovered agriculture. And once agricultural society starts, slowly you find that hunter-gatherer bands start settling down in certain places where they can till the soil. And over there, small townships appear, and those townships slowly grow into cities. And this is the advent of what I'm calling the Metal Age, but more specifically, it would be the Bronze Age. Tin and copper were the two metals. When they were put together, you would get bronze, and bronze was really the computer. It was the most technologically advanced thing of its era. And metal, in fact, was the most technologically advanced thing of its era, because prior to the Bronze Age, all you had was stones. And when the Bronze Age came about, humanity went through a massive shift in its technological ability, its ability to cooperate with each other, as well as succeed as a species. This is the period within which humans learned how to write. Written word came during this period, and the story is most interesting. Approximately 5,000 years ago, humans had now settled into cities. Cities had temples, and it was the job of some priests to also act as an accountant in these temples and account for the different types of livestock and commodity that were being brought in as tribute. And He had worked earlier with some potters and come up with a system of clay, not tablets, the clay balls that he would use clay tokens that he would use as placeholders for different types of commodities and different types of livestock. But he soon realized that it was a cumbersome process, and the clay tokens were converted into a clay tablet. He picked up a reed and started making pictographic representations of those clay balls onto the clay tablet. And with that simple act, written language was invented. And language is a very important part of humanity. Nobody can deny that. And keep this in mind, because our language plays a big role even in our computing age. So now that writing has been created, the other important thing is that this priest had actually created a ledger. What he was trying to do was keep a ledger of what's coming in and what's going out. And it's fair to say that the first written document created by man was a ledger. Considering that today's entire talk is about blockchain, which is a ledger technology, I think that is significant and worthy of mention. Now, as writing came about, along with writing, we also got single entry accounting or single entry bookkeeping. And the Metal Age got single entry bookkeeping, and along with that, we got silver coins. The Bronze Age era in Mesopotamia is relevant because the first metal coin is from this period. It's called the Mesopotamian shekel, and that is what was the first metal token that was used by most of the city-states in that region. And as with this period gave us not only writing and money, but we also got the wheel. As I said, we got the cities, we got foundries, we also got written laws, because now we can write. And with writing, the first thing we do was written laws. And with the ability of being able to write laws allowed rulers to enforce to have safer societies for everybody, that allowed for civilizational growth and in turn trade. So this is the story of the Bronze Age. Now the Bronze Age continued for a long period of time, 2000 years almost, and in this uninterrupted 2000-year stretch, it was highly successful. Based out of the Mediterranean and Mesopotamian region, there were huge trade routes, massive for its size, that originated. There were networks that ran all the way from Asia to Africa to Central Europe. It was huge. And most importantly, this network created a sort of globalized society which we recognize today and think of novel. We think of globalization as an industrial era concept, whereas the Bronze Age people had very much achieved a globalized society, aided with all the different technologies, but most importantly, armed with money and armed with single entry accounting, because that's what really let trade happen. So the Bronze Age society unfortunately collapsed because of a variety of climate-related, sociological, ecological, political, and allied reasons, very similar to what society today seems to be. So we have to be careful of that. But after the Bronze Age collapse, it was time for iron to shine. That was the next big boom. There was another technological bull run that takes place with the Iron Age. And now humans have forgotten all about bronze, and they're making coins and tokens out of gold and silver. Iron is mainly being used to make steel for armor, for basically its version of the military industrial complex. And in this Iron Age, cities now convert into empires. And what was a coin that was kind of socially invented, the Mesopotamian shekel was a social currency, whereas now rulers were issuing their own currencies. So for the first time, we have rulers in China and rulers in a kingdom called Lydia who issue their own version of minted coins. Their sovereign tokens are being now issued. And with the advent of sovereign minted coins, a new age of nation states almost start taking off, because the most important thing that this enables is taxation. Taxation is the lifeblood of most empires and today nation states. And it's no coincidence that the first law that India has passed to regulate the use of cryptocurrency are taxation laws. So in this context, now you have a very wide network. I mean, the population on Earth of humans has also exploded. Nations have, empires are now fighting amongst each other, and global trade is at an all-time high. And this requires merchants, and there were many famous, big, powerful merchants during this period of time who had trade networks farther than anybody had ever seen during the Bronze Age even. And these individuals now needed to send value across. If they were getting something, they needed to give something in return. And when money was being loaded, when metal coins were being loaded onto chests and put on horse-drawn carriages and carts and sent across geographies, they were highly prone to theft, robbery, pilferage, and apart from it requiring a lot of security apparatus and just the inconvenience of the whole process. And it is that kind of led the tail end of the Iron Age individuals to start looking at an alternative kind of money. And what they found was paper. They had experimented with some form of IOUs using parchment and leather, but that never really took hold because parchment and leather were kind of hard to reproduce at scale. But once true paper making was invented in China, there was kind of no looking back. Initially, paper was not really used very popularly. It's kind of would probably be where cryptocurrencies are today in the scheme of fiat money and crypto money. And this, I'm talking about the middle of the Middle Ages. So that's 7th century. 7th century AD is where first paper IOU is issued. And soon different empires start issuing the same kind of IOUs in paper. And keep in mind, at this point, there are no banks. The industrial era has not taken place. Formal banking modern banking as we understand it has not been invented yet. For that, we have to wait for double entry accounting. And double entry accounting is something that happens somewhere towards the latter half of the Middle Ages, going into the Renaissance era. Because the location is Italy. There are some very wise individuals in Italy who understand and formalize and record a system of double entry accounting. And this is the 13th to 14th century Italy. And soon thereafter, not coincidentally, modern banking also emerges out of Italy, specifically Florence, the Medici bankers. They're the ones who understand the value of double entry accounting, and they're the ones who take the helm and really run with it. And thus is born modern entry accounting, based on paper. And metal coins have not really gone anyway. I mean, we still use coins today, so that stays throughout this entire narrative. But paper now starts playing a larger and larger role. And it is in fact the advent of paper currencies as well as the advent of double entry accounting, married to the invention of mass production, especially steel, that gives us the industrial era. The industrial age begins about 3.5 centuries after the invention of double entry accounting. And once the industrial era starts picking up steam, you find that most industrial centers have a zoo of banks that have cropped up. These are all private banks, not dissimilar to how thousands of cryptocurrencies have proliferated today. And all these banks, they prop up, they accept any form of token, any form of precious metal you give them, mainly gold and silver. And in return, they give you a piece of paper that is redeemable for that amount of gold and silver you gave them. The key here is that this paper is transferable. It's a very similar concept to what was happening in China 700 years ago, 1,000 years ago, from that point of time. And this allows people to actually buy a house, hand over a piece of paper, and not have to go to the bank, pick up a bunch of gold, give it to an individual. And in an era where trade is picking up steam even more than before, I mean, all of this is actually on an exponential curve because that's how technology works. And as trade is picking up exponentially, you find that the adoption of paper money is also picking up exponentially. And that kind of brings us to the world wars. By the time the world wars come about, central banks have not really got a very strong foothold in most industrialized nations. Just an aside, when you go to non-industrialized nations at that point of time, sometimes within even the same country, you could at the same time be using shells as money, you could be using skins as money, metals as rudimentary metals as money, and there were some places where even stones were being used as money. So the form of money is, and all old forms of money somehow still retain some value somewhere, while at the same time new forms of money are being adopted in different eras. You can think of it like a snake, but the head is in the, in the industrial era and the tail is in the Stone Age. So now in this context, you have central banks that are not particularly strong. And the reason for that is most currencies are backed by a commodity, usually gold or silver. The first central bank comes up in Sweden in the year 1668, which is about 100 years before the industrial era picks up steam, so to speak. And it's only after the World War I and the World War II that most industrialized nations give up their commodity money monetary regime and adopt a fiat currency monetary regime. This happens in phases in most places, and there's only one nation state that really held out, which was Switzerland. Switzerland was the only country that maintained a commodity-backed currency well into most of our modern era. And with that, now with the end of the World War, 1975, we get the first signs of our information age, because it is actually to tackle the axis menace of cryptography, which in the form of the Enigma machine, that modern computing was actually devised to kind of crack these cryptographic codes. So cryptography and computing have a very, very old relationship. And as from 1945, when we come to 1960s, we find that a transition is being made from computers now running on vacuum tubes to running on microchips, integrated circuits. And once integrated circuits come about, the advent of machine language starts, programming languages start kicking in. And this is for the first time that, after the Mesopotamian era, 5,000 years ago, this is the first time we have another language, a form of language, where one is a human language and one is a machine language. And these are both ways of communicating, one with machines and one with humans. And I will argue that this has a profound impact. This had a profound impact, has brought us to where we are, and is definitely going to have an even more profounder impact going into the future. So now, somewhere around the 1970s is when the information era or the information age is supposed to have kick-started. And during this period of time, fiat currencies or central bank currencies are at an all-time high. There is a lot of experimentation going on with money. Magnetic chips have been invented, which leads to people using the proto forms of debit cards and credit cards come into the picture. But it is only in 1985 that the concept of a digital money is propounded for the first time. And it's about 4 years later, in 1989, when the World Wide Web is being planned, that the planners of the World Wide Web actually make a provision for an internet money within the HTTP protocols, which is very significant, because today we've all experienced a 404 error, but none of us have experienced a 402 error. A 402 error is a one where your payment gateway or your payment service provider is not found. So this is to say that even though the concept of e-money or money that is denominated in ones and zeros is approximately 22 years old, the concept of digital money is much older than that, which is always the way with technology. And so that brings us to the year 2000. The dot-com boom is at its peak, information age is at its peak, and it is in this environment that a central bank, I think it is Europe, that sanctions the first use of e-money. And this is a profound step, because for the first time money stops being something that is physical and goes into the realm of something that's digital. Money is not a tangible thing you can hold anymore, but is a series of ones and zeros in a computer somewhere. And as is the way with the exponential curve of technology, it takes maybe 9 years for somebody to drop the Bitcoin white paper on us. And once we get the Bitcoin white paper, I argue that is the beginning. I mean, that phase, that era is the beginning of the exponential age. Because what we find is that with the Bitcoin white paper, a new form of money has now been proposed. The white paper argues that a cryptographically secured P2P, a peer-to-peer digital cash mechanism can be operated over the internet. And whereas money in ones and zeros is has been there for the last, let's say, 9 years, all earlier money was denominated in was based on a double entry bookkeeping system. Whereas when Bitcoin comes about, it proposes a triple entry bookkeeping system where the cryptographical architecture that we call blockchain is actually a triple entry bookkeeping system. And if there is one thing you take away, it is that triple entry bookkeeping is the most profound thing that has come out of this current blockchain revolution. So now that's all good in theory. But it has to have a real world use case. And the real world use case for Bitcoin comes about on 22nd of May, 2010, where one very hungry lad, starving like his Paleolithic ancestors, I presume, makes an offer on the internet and says, I'm willing to pay 10,000 Bitcoin to anybody who's going to send me some pizza. And he receives 2 large Papa John pizzas, in return for which he gives Bitcoin to the sender of the pizza. And lo and behold, you have the first Bitcoin transaction in real life. And that really concludes the story of money that starts with Paleolithic man and Flintstones and ends with a blockchain-based transaction that takes place not too many years, merely 12 years ago. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So now you've understood the history of, I've tried to explain the history of how we got to blockchain. Now, how does blockchain become Web3? That's the big question. So if you look at this slide, you will find that I've broken up the use cases of the blockchain into 2 broad camps. The 2009 camp is where blockchain is being used merely as a cryptographic ledger. Its primary function is to give the user a form of sound money, something that's on a triple entry bookkeeping system that is written in computer language, that is distributed, and that cannot really be fiddled around with. So in this camp, you find that there is Bitcoin, there are all the copycat forms of Bitcoin that really came after that. You will find that there are collateralized stable coins, and they may even be collateralized central bank digital currencies that may fall into this camp at a later stage. There are also examples of certain synthetic assets that are tagged to physical assets like gold and silver, like back in the day. So this may also come within this use case. But now when you shift your focus to the next use case, you find that you have a cryptographic ledger plus a compute function. And the year is 2015. 2015 is when Ethereum comes onto the scene, where some brilliant programmers have this brilliant idea where they say, we take this blockchain and we give it some computing function. They develop a language called Solidity, on which which allows you to run smart contract compute functions on the blockchain. And the combination of smart contracts and blockchains gives you what can very loosely be called a computer in the sky. It's literally a computer in the sky, right? Because this is now a Turing complete computer. They call it a Ethereum virtual machine. And you can do most of the functions that your PC can do for you, this computer can do for you as well, in a very rudimentary sense, but it can very much do it. And simply with the compute function, you get a different sequence of use cases that you can see on your screen. All of this comes from the compute function. You get a host of tokens, utility, security, collateralized. There are billions of names that we can add, but they are basically ERC20 tokens or similar tokens of other blockchains like Solana or Cardano, the whole bunch of them. Then you get smart contracts, which I've already spoken about. You get decentralized finance and some forms of even centralized finance. You get non-fungible tokens. You've heard a lot about that, I'm sure. This is something that Nishchal will cover. You get metaverse platforms. Right now, metaverse platforms are like a community common. So it's a very interesting place that the internet is going, and it's probably an iteration of the current day social media. You get the next iteration of companies, which is distributed autonomous organizations. You get central bank digital currencies, which is a work in progress, so spaces to be watched. And ultimately, you get algorithmic stablecoins. This is a little bothersome because there have been some bad experiments with this recently, but it's still there, and there is hope that these things will ultimately be evolved and iterate. And these are early days. And with that, can I have the next slide, please? And I'm also going to hand over to Pranay, who's going to give you a much more in-depth and technical analysis of what really Web3 is.
Thank you, Dhrupad, for the history of money. I think you brought us through to Web3 through the history of money. I'm going to take a leaf out of your book and do something very similar with the history of the internet. Of course, we're not talking about 300 millennia, we're talking about 35 years. It's a lot shorter. But when we talk about Web3, let's start at the first Web 1.0. And as you said, language and technology is the common thread between how money evolves, how transactions evolve, and how human life has evolved in a certain sense. Web 1 was based on a language that was HTML. It was very basic, and it allowed only one thing. It allowed for a developer to post data online and for a user to access that data and read that data. It was very simple. There was no interaction between the website and the user beyond just reading. Web 2 came about when even more new languages came into the fray, like Java and JavaScript, that allowed for interaction between the web interface, or the platform now it was called, and the user. And this led to a development of user-generated content. User-generated content is what we see today in terms of social media, in terms of YouTube, which is a massive industry in itself. User-generated content also pushed the development of more languages in the web space. And as you mentioned, Solidity. So now what we have is Web3. They take the user-generated content, they take new languages, and they add a whole new layer to the internet, where this content is not only developed by the user, but it's also managed and monetized by a user by building an app around it through the Web3 protocol layer. So we have evolved from a point where only a developer could post content on the internet to where a user could post content on the internet but managed by the social media platform, to now where a user himself manages its own content, owns its own content, and is able to distribute its own content however it wants to and get paid for it. That in itself is where the history of money and the history of the internet intersect, is in Web3, where internet and money have now become synonymous with a worldwide economy. May I have the next slide, please? Now, we are, of course, a long way from Pizza Day. Pizza Day was somebody making an offer for an exorbitant, you said 10,000, did you? That's quite a lot of coin to pay for 2 large Papa John's, but sure. And we've come a long way from there by now. And what we've seen is there are 2 large, you can divide adoption of Web3 into 2 spheres. One is the new industries that are emerging from Web3. These are, for example, exchanges, cryptocurrency exchanges, NFT sales platforms and marketplaces, DeFi platforms that are disrupting the financial world by offering finance to the unbanked, and several other examples and iterations. There are also legacy businesses, legacy Web 2 businesses that are very naturally transitioning into Web3 and triple entry bookkeeping and blockchain. These are, for example, you could look at social media, which are the metaverse. In fact, Facebook has gone so far as to call itself Meta, and it's embraced the Web3 phenomenon full bore. Financial services and banking are also looking at transitioning into Web3 and blockchain, and this is something that's so ubiquitous with banking that we would be surprised to not see a transition in banking. Content distribution is also looking at very significantly shifting into Web3, but legacy businesses, as they transition into Web3, would be looking at it more from the perspective of a back-end transition. As Web 1 and 2, if you could tell from this brief history, dealt more with the user interface and the user side of upgradation of the internet, whereas Web 3 has really beefed up the back-end, where the back-end has now become powerful enough to enable the content developer and the user to be more in control of what's going on in the internet. And this back-end development then, when it's transitioning into legacy businesses, is not really very visible to a user. And also, in that sense, doesn't really interact with the law in a nuanced way so as to lead to the development of new law or new regulation. What we want to look at here, though, is new businesses that are coming out of Web3 and how they are reacting with law and how they are growing. For that, can I have the next slide, please? Most Web3 businesses today exist or want to exist online. Disruption is the keyword, the buzzword, and it's truly disruptive. It's not disruptive. But can a Web3 business today exist entirely online? Is that a pipe dream or is that a reality? New businesses will find that a lot of the basic essentials that affected existing traditional businesses are still very much in play, and it's more or less a new old wine in a new bottle. It's the same experience. And to break it down, if I may have my next slide, I've put together 6 basic essentials that any business, any successful business needs to check off in order to go from a concept or an idea to a marketable product that goes to market and to turn a profit. The first thing you need is, well, a great idea. A great idea leads to a great team, and that leads to a very, very nicely made pitch. That pitch is reduced into a charter document of sorts, or a pitch document, or articles of association, or memoranda of association, or a prospectus, or in today's world, it's known as a white paper. Now you build your white paper, you send it out there, that attracts you a good team. You have a team ready to build an application for you, but you need to pay that team. They need to be remunerated. They need to be incentivized to work towards the goal, and for which you definitely need funding. Funding, of course, can be raised in the traditional way. There are angel investors, there are tech investors, financial services investors that are looking at investing in blockchain and Bitcoin, and not Bitcoin, but of course blockchain, DLT, and ancillary technologies, Web3 technologies very actively. Most startups, though, will find that they are keen on getting funding from the new pool of investors that exist. If I may have my next slide, please. So when you're looking at funding, there are traditional investors and new age investors. New age investors will invest in you through traditional contracts, which are known as SAFTs in certain cases, or they could be traditional investment contracts with a return on investment baked into it. But they will give you money in cryptocurrency, and because that's what they have, that's why they're new age investors. That's where they made their money, and that's why they are also looking at putting that money back into the industry that made that wealth for them. It's a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy where they see that if we invest in it, it will grow. If it grows, we will benefit from it because we're sitting on a stockpile of coin. And in that sense, when you receive funds from a token or in tokens, that can perhaps be a bit of a problem for you. So these are the little things that the Web3 dream does not tell you. Not all vendors will be very comfortable engaging with you in cryptocurrency alone. Basic amenities like rent, electricity, sustenance for your office, basic office supplies may have to be paid in traditional fiat currency. You may have to walk into a store and swipe a card. For which reason, that brings me to my next slide. banking becomes very crucial. Now, one would think that you would want to, if you exist only online and cryptocurrency is a fantastic store of value and is so widely accepted, why do I at all need banking services? Well, banking is sort of where the rubber meets the road in any business, insofar as you need to utilize your funds to pay off traditional debts. Banking may not be the easiest access service presently for Web3 businesses. When you go and make an application to a bank, you may walk into a bank and say, hey, I have 5, 10, 15 million dollars worth of funding, and I need a bank account to be able to spend that funding. And they'll be very happy to welcome you in, but they may not be very happy to open an account for you when they hear that you're holding it all in cryptocurrency. The reason being that in often times that the source of that cryptocurrency cannot be traced. That's the nature of the cryptocurrency, and many cryptocurrencies, and that's also the nature of the business. And so banks are traditionally not too keen to do business with you. This is a gap that's being filled actively. There are some new banks coming out of Europe, especially out of Switzerland, that may be addressing this, that are purporting to exist online and to service this new age industry. But till that time, it is a significant hurdle to cross to achieve banking status in a Web3 business. Assuming though, let me not say that you cannot be a successful or a developmental business without a bank account. Assuming that you manage to find an ecosystem where you can exist solely on cryptocurrency and online. So you've got your team, you've got your white paper roadmap, you've got your funds. Now, what you use those funds is for operational expenses to develop a product. That product is what you take to market and how you earn your revenues. That product could be a product, it could be a service, it could be anything, but for the sake of discussion, let me just call it a product. Once you take your product to market and it starts earning revenue, you need to be able to protect that, because the core asset that any IT company develops is the product, which is purely protectable in IP. And of course, Nishchal will come to that later, so I'm not going to really dwell on it too much. Can I have my next slide? Actually, we can skip this. Can we get the next slide, please? Risk mitigation. Risk mitigation comes once you have had a successful launch of an MVP. The minute you start making money, the minute you start interacting with humans and with nation states and law and regulation, you do draw some liability in terms of that interaction. These risks, like Dhrupad said, number one, tax. You can't avoid it. If you're making money, if you're successful, tax is a risk. The second is regulatory risks. Regulatory risks are predominantly seen in financial services or financial services adjacent services, where data protection and other regulatory rules and regulations come into play. These are important because in several jurisdictions, violation of these regulations carry penal provisions. Penal provisions then have to be defended, and if not successfully defended, have to be suffered. Similarly, when it comes to labor law, a lot of jurisdictions have very strict labor regulations that hold management responsible for labor issues. And in those cases, risk mitigation becomes very important, where if you don't have a mitigation plan in place, you may, as a development team or as a founder, find yourself personally responsible for these liabilities. Similarly, in risk mitigation is loss and fragmentation of assets. This again, I believe Nishchal will cover in greater detail, but that goes back to my point of asset protection and IP, that you need to be able to protect your product in a way that you get to exclusively exploit and monetize it in the future. Now, these are, can I have the next slide, please? The last liability hurdle that Web3 businesses don't consider before they launch into it, because they have a great idea and a great team and great funding, is regulatory approval. Many activities that we may conceive as developers, we cannot possibly assume are regulated activities, but they do end up being so. even if it is for something as innocuous as just collecting user data. It behooves a new business that before you go to market, you do a proper assessment of your activity in every jurisdiction where you're offering the product or service to secure proper licenses from the identified regulators so that you don't suffer penal provisions under regulations anywhere across the globe. This is one more hurdle that definitely needs to be looked at, and it's not really very greatly talked about when you're looking at forums on Web3 and how Web3 businesses are developing. It's more a shoot first and field questions later approach, as opposed to a pad up, bat up, get an idea of the pitch, and then step out to bat. This brings me to my next slide. How does one mitigate all of the above risks? How does one start to mitigate all of these above risks? We have found that a legal wrapper, which is a juristic entity that espouses the same beliefs that your Web3 or online business wants to, but creates a layer between the founders and the actual business activity that then can mitigate all risks coming inwards, particularly if we take an example of taxation. Taxation would then stop, the liability for taxation would stop at that legal wrapper's level and would not be passed on to the founders or the creators of that software or that piece of application. This, of course, choice of legal wrapper comes down to two very basic factors. One is the activity you choose to operate in, that will determine the jurisdiction you land in, which is a friendly jurisdiction to the activity you're carrying out. And the second is the philosophies that your online business or your online organization wants to carry, how well they are mirrored in a real world existing or a newly created bespoke legal entity like a foundation or perhaps even a partnership or an LLP, which then limits the liability flowing from the business activity on the one hand, and on the other hand creates a juristic container to house and espouse the assets for exploitation, monetization, and protection. And to talk more on that, I would like to hand it over to Nishchal, who's going to take us through what happens when you've got a good product and you're out there to market.
Thank you, Pranay and Dhrupad. That was very insightful. And thank you for handing it over to me, Pranay. So as Pranay said that, in this segment, we'll talk about the interface of IP with Web3 technologies. So as Pranay put it, that when any new technology comes in, there are a slew of new products and services that come up, which are all covered by IP. There is creation of IP. So this interface has a broad impact on at least two industries, a major impact on at least two industries. One is the tech development industry, where in the Web3 product or in the Web3 product stack, be it the protocol layer, which is Ethereum, Bitcoin, Solana, these are examples of that. The infrastructure layer, which is built on the protocol to make the product safer, more secure, provide certain facilities, certain specific functions that it performs. The third layer being the use case layer, which is where regulation usually comes in. This is the interaction of the technology with the user. This includes tokens, NFTs, play to earn gaming platforms, the metaverse, DAOs, smart contracts, etc. Then the last one is the access layer, which provides the user access to these technologies. These products include wallets, platforms, decentralized apps, aggregators, and integration platforms with traditional Web2 platforms. Now, what we see here that all these are software products. So one major IP that comes out of the development of these Web3 technologies is software. The other industry which has been impacted or rather has benefited from these Web3 technologies is the media and entertainment industry, or what you call the creator economy. So content is being generated on the platform, where tech development software is IP for the platform. In the media and entertainment industry, content is being generated on the Web3 platforms. So the content may be traditional in the way what the content is, but the distribution and access of the content has changed due to these Web3 technologies. So this content could be in the form of artwork, music, films, performances, games, digital avatars using the personality of a person, photographs, user-generated content, and merchandise. Now we've identified two broad IPs that are created in the Web3 space, one being software and the other content. Can I have the next slide, please? Now we discuss how are these rights protected in the existing IP framework. When I talk about the existing IP framework, Pranay had labored on the regulatory risks in the Web3 space. So while the regulations with respect to financial services are still a work in progress, the IP laws as they are quite accommodating of Web3 technologies as they exist today. Now, when we talk about the different kinds of content created for Web3 and on Web3, one, software is protected under various laws. One is copyright. It is essential for developers to understand what buckets of IP would their rights fall under when they are creating products. It's important to structure your IP. The importance of legal wrappers has been discussed by Pranay. So I will go into what are the IPs what are the different buckets of IP that would cover software. So one is copyright. The source code can be protected as an original literary work. Software can be protected as patents if they meet the patentability criteria of being a novel product, having an inventive step, and having industrial application. Moreover, software products can be patented if they show a technical effect, which many courts have held, including in India, where the recent Faridlani case, the Delhi High Court has specifically stated that blockchain-related inventions may be patented in the future. Algorithms can also be protected as trade secrets. Trademarks for the branding is an important aspect again. And lastly, what is most important here is the other contractual obligation, the contractual legal cover or the legal wrapper that protects this IP and envelopes this IP. Then we go on to what kinds of IP are created, what kind of IP would cover the content that is created on the Web3 space. So majorly what is being created, as we had discussed, is copyright, is the subject matter of copyright. They are subject matters of works and performances. Works could include literary works, artistic works, musical works, cinematographic films, sound recordings, and live performances. Interestingly, there have already been disputes related to content on the Web3, copyright disputes. The notable case being that of Quentin Tarantino and Miramax, although it had aspects of the contract and copyright both, which underscores the importance of legal wrappers in the space, not just for protection, but also for monetization of the content. Not only for mitigation of the risk, but also for monetization of the content. Trademarks, again, trademarks can be protected on the in the Web3 space. There can be use, enforcement, and protection of trademarks. Nike was involved in an NFT dispute where certain NFTs using the Nike brand name were issued. They were backed by original Nike products. However, Nike did take an objection to that. That matter is currently pending. Nike and McDonald's have in fact applied for trademark registrations for NFTs and the metaverse. Initially, there was some confusion on how these digital assets would be classified under the existing NIS classification. However, recently the EU IP office has come up with some guidance saying that digital assets such as NFTs and the metaverse services can be covered under the existing class 9 for software products and class 42 for software services. It's also important to keep in mind designs of products. Recently, there was an Hermes. Hermes had launched NFTs of its Birkin bag, and they had also been in a dispute with an entity which had launched counterfeit NFTs using the designs. Personality rights for creation of digital avatars having live performances on the metaverse, etc. These can be asserted and protected. And contractual or the licensing and assignment of this content and technologies can be covered by contract. Now, these are the rights that you have created for the Web3 space and on the content that you've created on the Web3 space. Now, what do you do with this? What do you do with the content? What do you do with this IP? The Web3 space offers monetization opportunities galore. Can we go on to the next slide, which discusses the monetization opportunities? There are new and novel ways of licensing content through NFTs using blockchain and smart contracts. We'll discuss NFTs in detail because that seems to be a recurring theme. Copyright and NFT appears to be a recurring theme from our analysis above. So we will discuss that in a little more detail, but we'll just go through what the monetization opportunities are for now. There could be merchandising of the content which is created or of personality rights. Resale royalties through the execution of blockchain smart contracts can be tracked and enforced, which was a huge problem for artists in the physical world to track where their products are being sold and then to recover the resale royalties. The advantage of Web3 is that you can bundle your IP with various services that your entity wishes to offer, or which could either be online or offline. It could lead to the creation of the metaverse. Cross-licensing opportunities on the metaverse to collaborate are massive. Again, so while the licensing will be carried out online, and we have mentioned smart contracts, you just take out some time to distinguish between smart contracts and dumb contracts, which is essentially the legal wrapper, which will govern the assertion and the grant of your rights. It is the legal wrapper that will do that, not the smart contract. There is a misnomer that if there is in the industry, at least in the creator industry, who are not very savvy with the law, that smart contract, there is no requirement of a legal wrapper if there is a smart contract. But smart contract is only a Web3 product. It is a piece of code which enables in the execution of certain clauses of the legal wrapper or the dumb contract. So in cases where content is being licensed online, it is very important to have end user license agreements, terms of sale, etc. in place to ensure that the monetization is done in the proper manner. Then we talk about enforcement of rights on Web3. Again, there have been instances, there have been disputes that we've discussed above, where takedown notices can be sent at the platform level because the current copyright and the IT laws enable you to ask the platform to take down the content in case it is infringing your rights. Complaints can be made to enforcement agencies. Courts will play a major role in determining how rights are enforced on the Web3 space. Of course, every new technology comes up with its own set of challenges. Initially, when piracy was rampant in the Web2 space, there were torrents being downloaded. Courts did grapple with how to deal with the situation. But eventually, now they have developed a framework where rights can be successfully enforced in the Web2 space, which can also be transposed into the Web3 space. And if there are new challenges, that can be met through judicial precedent and public policy. Now, the fact that rights can be asserted, they can be monetized, and they can be enforced on Web3, due diligence, IP due diligence is of utmost importance. Because here, it's in many scenarios where you are monetizing your IP, it's not just you, but the entire community. For example, in a DAO, once you launch a project, a lot has gone into it. People would have invested in your project. You don't want it to be taken down for lack of doing a due diligence and infringing on third-party rights. Can I have the next slide, please? Right. So a major recurring theme that I said that comes out is copyright and NFTs. So we'll just briefly discuss the interface of copyright and NFTs to explain the kind of evolution of the law and the application of the law to Web3 technologies, taking copyright as an example from from the IP side, and NFT as an example from the Web3 product pool. Now, there again, there are questions that when you issue an NFT, are you divesting your IP rights as well? The answer to that is no. And non-fungible tokens are again a piece of code. You may have the right in the piece of code, but that piece of code also has metadata which links it to an asset. It could be an IP asset or otherwise, which resides elsewhere, right? So there is storage of the content at one place, and the token is issued on the blockchain, and these two are connected. However, owning a token does not mean that you own any rights to the IP, unless, of course, it is governed by the dumb contract or the legal wrapper, which we had discussed before. An NFT will only give the owner proof of ownership of that asset, which may reside elsewhere. Now, when we have to discuss whether NFTs are covered by current law, some basics about copyright law, which I would want to discuss. If we can go on to the next slide, Adam, please. Now, here is where the interface is. Does NFT create a new copyright? Does it create a new right, or is it only a medium of exchange and access? So copyright is a bundle of rights. Copyright is in the works that we had discussed above. Those could be your assets, which are artistic. It could be a piece of art, it could be a song, it could be a film. But you have a bundle of rights to exploit those works, which is what essentially copyright is. So a right to make copies of it, the right to distribute it, the right of storage. Right of storage is important for NFTs. A right to communicate it to the public, right to make it available. So these are the bundle of rights which are promised under copyright. These are the bundle of economic rights. You also have moral rights, which form a part of copyright. Then these rights can be exploited through various modes and mediums. The various modes of exploitation is to manufacture, sell, license, or distribute. License and distribution is important from the NFT perspective. And the mediums of exploitation are then on how you distribute it, which in the traditional sense, earlier, if you have to give examples in the physical world, were done if music or had to be distributed. It was done through cassettes and DVDs. Now in the digital age, it is done through download, streaming, OTT services, and now NFTs. So NFTs is only a medium of exchange. It's a new medium of exchange, but it is not a new copyright which has been created in favor of the owner. Now, if we go on to the next slide, so this slide, what I essentially want to cover here is the Dhrupad spoke about the history of money, and Pranay spoke about the history of the web, internet. I like to speak about the history of technology and the evolution of copyright laws along with it. So there are certain basic principles that law and technology both are created on a need basis. Technology usually, the evolution of the innovation and technology usually precede changes in the law. However, before there is mass adoption, or while there is mass adoption of that technology, laws are introduced at that time. Many times there are existing laws which take care of any incremental innovation in technology. However, if there is a tectonic change in technology, that would be covered by, that would require a change in law. So just to give you an example of how copyright laws have evolved over time and ended at Web3 products such as NFTs. this table gives the invention in the first column, the year of the invention in the second column, the rights which are being exploited. This is the bundle of rights which came into existence over time, and the year in which the first law covering these rights was instituted. So the Gutenberg press, which was invented in 1440, was the first technology which could make photocopies of books and literary works. It was essentially done to give access to people to the Bible, right? It was invented in 1440. However, the first law to protect the right of the right holder was introduced almost 270 years later, which was in 1710. Similarly, if you see the second right, which is the right to make sound recordings, the phonogram was invented in 1877. However, the law came into existence in 1961, the first law protecting the rights. That happened when vinyl records and audio tapes were invented in the 50s and 60s. So although the invention was way back in 1877, the mass adoption came along in the 1950s and 60s, and the law came in 1961. Similarly, for cinematographic films, although the cinematograph was invented in 1892, it's only when video cassettes were invented in 1969, the technology became cheaper, there was access to that technology, that the laws were introduced. Now, similarly, if we come down to the last one, which is the right to make available or to store, which is essentially the right being exercised for distribution of NFTs, we go back to Web 1, where these rights of storage were introduced first. In the 90s, when internet was introduced in the avatar of Web 1, and there were laws which were introduced. There are two treaties, international treaty. One is the WIPO Copyright Treaty. The other is the WIPO Phonograms and Performers Treaty, which cover the right to make available and on storage. They also prescribe mechanisms for takedown, which have been implemented in the laws of various countries, including DMCA. So the argument here is that NFTs as such, although these matters are pending before court, in our view and assessment, they cause an incremental change in technology from Web 1 to Web 3, and not a tectonic change, at least in the IP space, to cause a change in the law. Now, which provides an existing framework for business owners to adopt and do their business, which leads to unlocking of a lot of potential. If you can go to the next slide. Aaron, can you go to the next slide? Yes. So we've spoken about the history and evolution of Web3, and Dhrupad and Pranay have gone into it in fair detail. However, I just want to discuss the functions of all kinds of web, and just to corroborate the point that no changes in law are required. However, the impact of this technology using IP laws is immense. Now, in Web3, the only function, in Web 1, the only function that the internet performed was provide the user access to content and data. With Web 2, in addition to the access, there was exchange of information through downloads, streaming, social media, e-commerce, etc., interaction and monetization. However, all of this would be controlled by a few intermediaries. The only additional function that Web3 performs over the functions that Web2 performs is record keeping. Now, record keeping gives record keeping is the maintenance of ledger and licensing, etc. Of course, it makes it easier, but at the same time, it permeates through all the other functions of Web 2 in a more decentralized and a democratized manner, giving huge potential to creators and developers to use Web3 technologies and leverage the IP in these technologies to monetize and protect them. Now, when we talk about opportunities, can we have the last slide, please, Aaron? All right, so the key takeaways and opportunities that we see from what we discussed and what we discussed, and of course the existing framework of IP and how it can help in bringing about a change in regulation. So we've seen from our assessment that when there is mass creation of IP, when there is innovation in a new kind of technology, it is usually indicative of the impending mass use and implementation of it. When there is mass use and implementation of it, the governments can no longer ignore the use of that technology, and therefore it bringing about a swifter change in the regulatory frameworks to enable businesses, enable ease of doing businesses uh, for players in the Web3 space. Now, if we talk specifically about India, what are the opportunities for Web3 businesses in India? Of course, the answer to that is it's the largest consumer market. Any online company would want to offer their services in India, irrespective of where they are based or how they are globally structured. As Pranay said, you want to structure your entity in a manner which is most conducive to your business. But having said that, even if entities do not have a presence in India, a physical presence in India, they definitely want to do business in India to tap into the large market. The problems with Web3 that could currently be that there is a lack of access and literacy to these technologies. However, these again can be solved through IP and innovation. As we see, through innovation, products can be made cheaper and more accessible. India has a large talent pool of developers, which should be tapped into, and this is what the government should look into and ensure that they are incentivized to work in India and ensure that there is no brain drain. We've also seen some positive regulatory trends owing to mass adoption of these technology, because the more people adopt, use these technologies in their businesses, there is more clamor and the governments do listen to you. An example being initially the first any kind of paper that the government came up with spoke about banning of cryptocurrencies. However, subsequently the word banning was replaced with regulating. Then the government put in a regulatory framework for taxing virtual assets. Again, there was a clamor to remove certain NFT related services and products from the definition of digital assets, which has been clarified by the government now. So regulation is moving in the positive direction. So therefore, the opportunities are abundant, which should be availed. And with that, we're done. We have some more slides on regulatory framework, but we'll just share it with the audience. Sorry for overstepping our time, Dan.
No problem at all, Nishal. I can see our audience have remained with us throughout. So although we went a little bit over, I know that they were very interested in what you all had to say, which is great. As Nishal says, we will send those slides over to you once the webinar has finished today, along with a recording of the webinar. But I would like to say a huge thank you to Dhrupad, Pranay, and Nishal for today. Your presentations were incredibly insightful. I'm sure our audience appreciated that. As I say, they remained with us throughout, so thank you very much for being with us today and participating in today's webinar. If you do have any questions, please do get in touch with our panel, who will be happy to help with that. But for the time being, thank you very much again for being with us today. We really appreciate it. I hope we can see you all again soon. Goodbye.